April 11th, 1951, Tokyo, American Embassy Compound, 1 p.m. local time. General Douglas MacArthur is dining with his wife Jean and their 13-year-old son Arthur. 5-star general, supreme commander for Allied powers. He has ruled occupied Japan for 6 years, rebuilt the country from ashes, wrote its constitution, wielded more authority than any American general in peacetime history. The telephone rings in the corridor. Colonel Sidney Huff, MacArthur's closest aide, takes the call. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune asks for comment on being relieved of command. Huff's face goes pale. He turns on the commercial radio. Stations across Tokyo are broadcasting the same news. President Truman has fired General Douglas MacArthur, relieved of all commands effective immediately. General Matthew Ridgway will replace him as United Nations commander in Korea. MacArthur sits motionless at the dining table. He is learning he has been fired by listening to a radio announcer read a press release. No warning, no personal call, no courtesy of official notification. 52 years of military service, victory across the Pacific, 5 stars, more decorations than most generals could name, and he finds out from a news broadcast meant for the public. MacArthur rises slowly from the table. He looks at his wife. 5 words. Jeannie. We're going home at last. That is all. No rage, no cursing, no breakdown, no demands for explanation. Then MacArthur walks upstairs to his bedroom and returns to bed. No calls to Washington demanding answers, no statements dictated to aides, no attempt to turn on the radio and hear more news. He simply goes back to sleep, as if nothing extraordinary has occurred. This reaction shocks everyone who knows MacArthur. The man is famous for ego, for theatrical speeches, for dramatic gestures that border on self-mythology. People expect explosion, fury, immediate counterattack, demands for justice. Instead, 5 calm words to his wife. Then sleep. The silence becomes more powerful than any outburst could be. The stillness more terrifying than rage. By April 1951, the relationship between Truman and MacArthur had fractured completely. They disagreed on everything that mattered about Korea. Truman wanted limited war, contain North Korea to the peninsula, avoid expansion into China, prevent World War III with the Soviet Union, keep the conflict regional, survivable, manageable. MacArthur wanted total war. Bomb Manchurian bases where Chinese aircraft sheltered between missions, naval blockade of China's coast, deploy Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist troops from Taiwan to open a second front on the mainland, possibly use atomic weapons on Chinese staging areas in Manchuria. For months, MacArthur had publicly contradicted presidential policy. He gave interviews to reporters criticizing Truman's strategy. He sent letters to Republican congressmen attacking the administration's appeasement of communism. In March 1951, he issued a public statement that deliberately sabotaged Truman's planned peace initiative with China, threatening to expand the war just as the president was preparing to propose negotiations. This was open defiance of his commander-in-chief. Not in private cables where generals traditionally argue strategy, but in newspapers, in congressional letters, in public statements designed to undermine presidential authority. The principle of civilian control over the military was being tested in public. MacArthur was betting his enormous prestige outweighed the president's constitutional authority. April 9, 1951, Washington. Truman convenes his top advisors in the cabinet room. The question is posed directly. Can MacArthur remain in command given his repeated public insubordination? The answer from everyone in the room is no. Secretary of State Dean Acheson agrees. Secretary of Defense George Marshall agrees. Even the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all military men who understand the warrior culture MacArthur represents, agree that the insubordination cannot continue without destroying the principle of civilian control. April 10th. Truman makes his final decision. MacArthur will be relieved of all commands. The plan was careful, designed to preserve some dignity. Secretary of the Army Frank Pace, who was in Korea inspecting troops, would fly to Tokyo and personally deliver the dismissal notice to MacArthur in private. This would allow the general to receive the news like a soldier, rather than a criminal, to process it before the world found out. But communication delays ruined everything. Cable traffic between Washington and Tokyo was slow. Meanwhile, word began leaking in Washington. Reporters were asking pointed questions. Truman feared the story would break in newspapers before MacArthur received official notification, which would be even more humiliating. At 1 a.m. Washington time on April 11th, which was 1 p.m. that same day in Tokyo, Truman authorized releasing the news to the press immediately. The official orders were transmitted to MacArthur by commercial telegram, the fastest method available. But the telegram arrived after the radio broadcast. MacArthur learned he was fired from a reporter's phone call and a news announcer's voice. It was a humiliating procedural failure. Truman later admitted it was badly handled, but the decision itself was irreversible. When MacArthur wakes that evening after his brief sleep, he faces a choice that will define how history remembers this moment. He could denounce the firing as illegal, a violation of military justice. He could claim Truman is appeasing communists and betraying American soldiers in the field. He could refuse to obey the order and force Truman to remove him physically from Tokyo. He could resign in protest rather than accept the humiliation of dismissal. MacArthur does none of these things. His first official statement, transmitted to Washington that evening, contains exactly 12 words. I have just received your message relieving me of my commands. I comply at once. No argument, no protest, no legal challenge, no refusal to obey. Immediate and complete acceptance of the President's authority. This shocks people who know MacArthur well. He is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. He is famous for massive ego, for theatrical gestures, for unshakable conviction that he is always right. Many expect him to rage against the decision, to claim political betrayal, to fight back with every weapon at his disposal. But MacArthur understands something crucial about the moment. If he accepts the dismissal with dignity, he maintains the moral high ground. The story becomes about Truman firing a great general, not about a general refusing to obey orders. By complying immediately and quietly, MacArthur executes a perfect strategic maneuver. He transforms himself from insubordinate to victim, from rebel to martyr, from the problem to the symbol of what is wrong with Truman's leadership. In America, the public reaction is immediate and explosive. Millions of Americans are outraged. They see Truman as a failed president firing a war hero for political reasons. They see appeasement of communism. They see betrayal of soldiers fighting and dying in Korea. Senator Joseph McCarthy declares that Truman must have made the decision while drunk on bourbon and Benzedrine. Senator Richard Nixon calls for Truman's impeachment. Senator Robert Taft suggests that European allies pressured Truman to fire MacArthur because they want to appease Stalin and avoid confrontation with communism. State legislatures across the country pass resolutions condemning Truman's action. In California, flags fly at half-mast, as if someone has died. In Texas, effigies of Truman are burned in town squares while crowds chant MacArthur's name. Truman's approval rating, already low at 32% before the firing, plummets to 26% within days. It is one of the lowest approval ratings ever recorded for a sitting president up to that point in American history. Meanwhile, MacArthur is being elevated to martyrdom before he even leaves Japan. Cities are planning massive parades. Congress is preparing to invite him to address a joint session. The narrative is already written in the public mind before MacArthur says a word in his own defense. The great general has been destroyed by a petty politician. April 19th, 1951, House Chamber. Every senator, every representative, Supreme Court justices, cabinet except Atchison and Marshall who refuse. Millions on radio and television. MacArthur enters to thunderous applause, speaks 37 minutes, defends Korea conduct, explains strategy, criticizes limited war without attacking Truman directly. In war, there is no substitute for victory. Direct repudiation of Truman's strategy. 9 words compressing the entire debate. Why, my soldiers asked of me, surrender military advantages to an enemy in the field? I could not answer. Then the climax. 52 years of service, growing old. The end approaching. I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye. The chamber erupts, congressmen crying, tears on hardened faces, minutes of applause. Representative Dewey Short. We saw a great hunk of God in the flesh. Theater. Manipulation. One of the greatest performances in American political history. MacArthur has turned dismissal into martyrdom, made himself victim, Truman villain, without seeming petty. The fadeaway line borrowed from old military ballad, not original, but delivered as if spontaneous farewell. People believe they witness a great man's final moment. But MacArthur has no intention of fading. Speaking tour begins. San Francisco, April 17th, 500,000 lining streets. 2 hours to travel 14 miles. Largest crowd in city history. Chicago, Milwaukee, enormous rallies everywhere. April 20th, New York City, the parade that breaks records. 19 miles through Manhattan, 7.5 million people. Largest crowd ever assembled in American history. Sanitation collects 2,850 tons of paper, more than any parade before or since. Ticker tape like snow. More people than for Eisenhower after World War II, more than Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. Every speech, MacArthur defends his position. War could have been won with his strategy. Truman, afraid to confront communism. Political considerations overriding military judgment. But careful. Never calls Truman coward, never accuses him of deliberately losing. Stays on right side of propriety. Lets supporters fill in harsher accusations. For months, MacArthur might run for president in 1952. He is 71, but he is Douglas MacArthur. Republican leaders float the idea. Then the message wears thin. People begin thinking about proposals, expanding war into China, nuclear weapons, World War III. Emotion fades. Logic seems dangerous. Senate Armed Services Committee hearings. MacArthur testifies 3 days. Then Truman's advisors. Then Joint Chiefs. Joint Chiefs' testimony devastating. America's top military leaders supported Truman's decision. MacArthur's strategy too risky. Expanding into China dangerous, unnecessary. MacArthur repeatedly ignored orders, exceeded authority. These are not politicians, generals and admirals, career officers, and they all say MacArthur was wrong. May 15th, 1951. General Omar Bradley, chairman of Joint Chiefs, gives devastating testimony. MacArthur's strategy would involve the United States in the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. Perfect phrase. Captures why Truman fired MacArthur in strategic terms. Not because MacArthur wrong about everything, but his Asia focus distracted from real threat in Europe. Soviet Union was real enemy. Europe, real battlefield. Korea, a sideshow. MacArthur wanted as main event. Bradley's testimony cuts through emotion, provides logical framework. Through summer 1951, public opinion shifts. People understand Truman fired MacArthur for genuine insubordination, genuinely dangerous strategy, not cowardice or political expediency. MacArthur's popularity fades. Presidential talk evaporates. By 1952, convention barely mentioned. Nomination goes to Eisenhower. After 1952, MacArthur does fade away. Chairman of Remington Rand Board, writes memoirs, occasional speeches, lives at Waldorf Astoria with Jeannie. No longer force in politics or military affairs. A legend of the past. What MacArthur said mattered less than how he said it. "Jeannie, we're going home at last," was perfect. Resignation, relief, ready to return after years abroad. "I comply at once," equally perfect. Dutiful soldier accepting orders, even unjust ones. Congress speech, the old soldier ending, was emotional manipulation masterpiece. Firing became tragic farewell, himself martyred hero, Truman villain. For months it worked, resonated with Americans frustrated with Korea, distrustful of Truman, nostalgic for World War II victories. But what MacArthur said could not overcome what he had done. Defied presidential authority, publicly contradicted commander-in-chief, placed military judgment above civilian control. In America, unacceptable. No matter the stars, no matter the battles won. The old soldier did fade away, but not before showing America that even greatest generals must answer to civilian authority. That was the real lesson. Compliance came too late to save his career, just in time to save the principle that in America, the president commands, and generals obey. Historical note. This account is based on documented historical records including MacArthur's congressional address of April 19, 1951, contemporary newspaper coverage, Senate Armed Services Committee hearings, May-June 1951, memoirs by Harry S. Truman and Dean Acheson, and scholarly research on the Truman-MacArthur controversy. The quote, "Jeannie, we're going home at last," is attested in multiple sources including first-hand accounts by members of MacArthur's staff. MacArthur's 12-word compliance statement and the Old Soldiers Never Die speech are part of the official congressional record. Crowd estimates for the New York parade, 7.5 million, come from contemporaneous police reports, though such figures are inherently approximate. General Bradley's "wrong war, wrong place, wrong time, wrong enemy" testimony is verbatim from the Senate hearings transcript. Historical interpretations of the necessity and wisdom of MacArthur's relief remain debated among scholars and military historians.